Hi, it's Dr. Gemma. And before I start the strategies today, I want to thank my latest coffee patron, Sarah H. Thank you very much. Your generosity and loyalty over the years are greatly valued by me. I really appreciate it. Okay, so today we're talking about one of the first strategies that I used on my podcast back in 2008. And this strategy is use your holidays appropriately. Okay. The reason I say this is a lot of religious groups are now against the holidays for various reasons, and I'm not going to go there because these are issues of your personal faith, and that's not for me to judge. But I do want to come out in defense of the holidays for a lot of significant reasons. And the biggest one is they serve many good purposes in all of the cultures that I know of. Now, having said that, look at me. I'm paper white, okay? So I can only speak from that background, no matter how hard I try. I can't be something that I'm not. And the reason I say this is because I'm paper white, we can see that I'm female. You can look at me and just tell I'm middle class, and I'm of a Christian background and also descended from Western Europeans, all right? And that is pretty close to the dominant cultural hegemony in America. Cultural hegemony is the culture that is basically running things fairly or unfairly. All right, they're the people in charge right now. And the difficulty is that holidays hit us in the cultural field. So I'm going to have to ask you to turn on your filters on this. You may have to forgive some of the things I say. They may just sound exactly what they are, as based in the cultural hegemony. But it's the only thing I can do. I can't be what I'm not for this talk. So please be patient with me and try to understand I'm doing the best I can based on my background. All right. Having said that, so the word holiday is obviously a corruption of the English words holy day. And that's important because in the medieval church in Western Europe, most of the clergy is heavily stratified, and most of them are actually the guys in the trenches. They are the village priests. And these priests are generally people who were born and raised in the village and eventually become their priests. They know everybody. And most of the people in the village in medieval times are, after a few generations, pretty closely related by blood and marriage. All right, everybody knows everybody else. And this is really important because it sets a few groups into conflict. Because you have feudal overlords running these places, and the overlords would gladly work the peasants to death for their own economic gain, because in their world, in the world of the upper classes, peasant lives are not particularly valuable and are worth using up if you have to get your own way. They believe that they are born among the privileged for a reason, that God wants them to do better than all these peasants, and so the peasants are expendable. In conflict with that, the peasants make up the bulk of the church, and the church has a government that's in competition with the secular government. So here we have some pressure points rubbing against each other in the average village. So the church realizes that the overlords are going to work the peasants to death, so they come up with this idea. And it's the holy day. And the holy day is you take a day during the week that's not on the seventh day when they all worship together. You take this day and you say, this is a special day in the church calendar, and we're all going to take the day off so we can go to church. And after church, we'll have a little drinking and a little fun and all that sort of thing. But it gives everybody a day off. It gives the peasants some break, some relaxation. It keeps the overlords from getting to work them to death. And by the way, it does help to make the peasants more loyal to the church government, which is good because they're trained from the cradle that they must be loyal to the feudal overlord and his secular government. So here you can see that the holy days are serving some very interesting economic purpose as well as the so-called spiritual one. That economically, we're keeping the peasants alive. We may be saving some of them from dropping dead in the fields, we hope. And we're also keeping the power of the church government more in balance with the power of the secular government as run by the overlords. So you can see there's economic stuff happening here. And I would tell you that that's pretty true in most holidays. Now let's go to Halloween since we've just passed it. And Halloween's a very interesting holiday. First of all, it's not in the Christian calendar, it's in the Celtic pre-Christian calendar. And the Celts develop it for a very good reason. They say that the new year begins November 1st at sunrise. The old year ends October 31st at sunset. And if you think about that, you're going to arrive at the inevitable question. If the old year ended at sunset and the new year doesn't begin for another 10, 12 hours, well, what time is going on during those hours of darkness between the sunset and the sunrise? I mean, what year are we in? The answer is we're not. The Celts said this is the time out of time, that when you are in this liminal space, this boundary space between the old year and the new year. Now, the Celts saw the afterlife as pretty basically a dimension equal to our own, populated by the dead. And so when you're in this liminal space, there's no boundary between the worlds anymore. So, the dead are walking around among us, and boom, Halloween, okay? And the interesting thing about that is by having that kind of celebration or reality in your calendar, as the Celts did, what you're doing is reminding people that death is a very real thing, and you have to learn to deal with it, which they did. In the age of the pre-Christian Celts, you had high infant mortality and child mortality. We didn't have the same lifespan we have now because of various risks and diseases and lack of immunization and vaccines. So these people are used to death in a way we aren't. In 21st century America, we've sanitized death. We hide it, we don't talk about it, we avoid it. All right, but the Celts had to live with it. And the members of the early Christian church had to live with it. And they had to live with the Celts. So they do something that's kind of brilliant. They say, if we want the Celts to convert to the early Christian church, what we're going to do is we're going to adopt their feast days, but we'll change them into Christianized versions. And so the early church takes Halloween and they move it one day ahead. They move it to the Celtic New Year so the Celts can still celebrate their New Year. And they call it All Saints' Day. And now it's been, a bit cleaned up. Now we're going to celebrate the saints of the church on their special day. And it's a holy day of obligation, as the Catholics would say, which means you take the day off from work and you go to church. So here we are. Halloween serves this multiple purpose, and we don't lose it. And it's interesting that we don't lose it in the Western European culture, because death is still among the Christians. They don't get to get rid of it. And in the funeral service in the early Christian church, they say, in the midst of life, we are in death, because they are. Because remember those villages where everybody's related to each other? When somebody dies, they have relatives all over the same village. So, traffic stops basically, and everybody goes to church, the funeral mass, and then they walk the corpse out to its final resting place in the village cemetery. All right? And so they still need these reminders of death, that the early Christian church, just like the Celts, has to deal with this reality of the frequency and normality of death. And so these holidays are a way for the leaders to try to instruct the people and support the people and help the people to understand a reality of their world, which is the commonality of death and how it hits anybody of any age. All right. And this is one of the reasons that I believe in Halloween, and I believe it should be preserved as a holiday. Because now that we've really hidden death and sanitized death, I think that we may not be adequately preparing our own people for its reality and training them in how to cope with it. So I think there's a great reason to have Halloween around. Having said that, this goes across cultures in some beautiful ways. You look at the Islamic feast of Ramadan. Now here we have a month-long fast in Ramadan. And spiritually, I can't say I understand all of it because I haven't been raised in that culture, but as I understand part of it at least, what you're doing is you're cultivating an awareness that there are hungry people and poor people in the world by practicing fasting, by going through the same experience that many people are going through who are not as lucky as you are. And so by going hungry, you become sensitized to the needs of the hungry and the poor. But when you think about it, it's really quite brilliant in several other ways. First of all, economically. If you're reduced to just having a big meal at sunset, or any meal at sunset, then obviously you're not spending the same amount of money on food. So Ramadan is really ingenious because it is a way economically of helping you set aside money that you can give to the poor. And so the whole community can benefit from your sacrifice. So along with the spiritual awareness you're getting, you're also economically being helped to support the poor, which is a great thing for any culture. But there's more. Now we know that medically fasting for 10 or more hours a day seems to be good for the human body, to do this every so often. So here you have a spiritual path that sets aside an entire month to do this activity It just seems to be healthy for us. Now, of course, the exception, the too young, the too old, and the sick. But we're talking basically about the healthy people observing it. So it's just a brilliant, brilliant idea. And of course, the Christians, the Catholics, have their version of it, Roman Catholics, in Christianity, and that's Lent. And Lent is brilliant because it does another thing, that Lent occurs at the time of the year in the Middle Ages when they were out of food. They were out of fresh meat, basically. So Lent is this amazing excuse to use up all the dried and preserved foods before Easter, which is when the spring is beginning, and there will be more availability of fresh meat. All right? So in Lent, you basically live on dried fish. From what I can tell, it's kind of like shoe leather with salt. And okay, fair enough, you're going to get a lot of electrolytes and you're going to get a lot of nutrients out of the dried fish. It may not taste too good. But the important thing is when you do this, that means you're not wasting the preserved foods from the previous harvest. And there's more. Apart from the fact, sorry, my notes just flipped out. Got to get my notes back. Apart from the fact that this may be quite healthy food, the other thing is remember that at this time of year, your cattle have bred and they're pregnant. So if you eat them, you're going to lose the young that are going to be born. And you're also going to be eating a lean animal that's not in great shape and not nutritionally as valuable to you. This is a great time to kill all the old stock, but they already did that probably around Christmas, all right? So the idea is we're going to not waste our food. We're going to eat all our dried, preserved foods, but we're also preserving the wild animals, letting the pregnant ones give birth so that we'll have more wild animals for next year, and we're preserving our farm herds as well. So economically, Lent makes brilliant sense, and it occurs just at the right time of year for it, all right? Having said that, I want to sort of summarize and just say, so what you get here is holidays make incredible economical, medical, and emotional and spiritual sense. Why would you not celebrate them? Why would you take them out of your calendar? I think it comes of being cut off from our history. This does not save us from the fact that there are problematic holidays. Columbus Day. If you're Italian like me and you're raised in the northeast of the United States, Columbus Day is basically celebrate being an Italian day. All right. Well, sorry guys. I mean, there's a movement to call it Indigenous Americans Day. I'm fine with that. But there's a certain sadness, like, well, when do we get to have Italians Day? I mean, you have St. Patrick's Day where you get to celebrate Irishness. So maybe we need to put aside a day for some saint and do that. I'd like to nominate St. Gemma. But having said that, again, you have Thanksgiving. It's a great idea to have a day of giving thanks. Isn't it just too bad that behind this is a story of the Native Americans being insanely generous to these people who have only come to displace them? Did the Pilgrims who arrived and were helped by the Native Americans actually have that plan in mind? Maybe not, but you can't avoid the fact that it's just wonderful act of generosity is going to, over the years, be paid with terrible oppression and genocide. I'd love to preserve Thanksgiving, but I just don't know how we can separate the reality of we want to give thanks from the cruelty of this story. So there we go. I would say the way we do handle this is we try to preserve the best any way we can. Having said all this, let me make clear to you, I don't believe there's a war on Christmas. I'm just going to put that out there. I think that's simply ridiculous. I think that's people with victim complexes trying to be even more victimized. I think Christmas is just fine, perfectly safe. Why do I say happy holidays? Because there's 29 holy festivals around that time of year because it's the solstice. And we're getting ready for the fact that we're going into the darkest time of the year with food shortages and the deaths of our more sick and weak and aged members of our society. So please, use your holidays. Gather with the people you love and give thanks and be grateful to have them one more time before the darkness hits. Okay, everybody. So there we go. Stay safe, take care of each other, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.